Why was she the one they laughed at? Why was it always her? The sun hammered down on the steel deck of the USS Horizon, turning every bolt and rivet into a mirror that seared the eyes. Boots clanged on the plates, shadows sharp, laughter sharpest of all. "Don't touch that, Vance," one of them jeered, his voice cutting through the salt air. "Leave the real weapons to real sailors." The words weren't new. They had been spoken in barracks, in passageways, whispered over trays in the mess. Today, though, they came with the stomp of boots, a rhythm of mockery echoing across the missile deck. Lyra Vance kept her head low. Her fingers tightened straps around a Tomahawk missile, double-checking the sequence. She didn't flinch at the words. She had learned long ago that silence was sharper than retorts. Words could be twisted. Silence forced others to hear their own noise. And still, the laughter pressed against her like heat. She swallowed it, eyes steady on the steel giant before her. 30 feet of ordnance, cables taut, the kind of weapon that didn't forgive mistakes. Every motion of her hands was deliberate, professional. She breathed the rhythm of the work. Then came the sound. A snap. Not the clang of dropped tools. Not the scrape of boots. A sound too sharp, too sudden, the sound of something breaking where it should not break. Her head whipped up. One of the cables had torn loose with a report like a rifle shot. The missile lurched, swinging wide, a pendulum of steel and fire. Its tail spun toward a young sailor frozen in place, eyes wide, body rigid with fear. No one moved. Not the officers, not the men who had jeered only seconds earlier. Only Lyra. She lunged. Her boots slammed the deck, her shoulder tearing through the heat-soaked air. She hit the sailor with her full weight, dragging him clear of the arc. His breath exploded in a choked gasp as they tumbled across the steel. The missile groaned above them, the weight of it straining against the last cables. Lyra was already moving. She slammed her shoulder into the trembling frame, feeling the jolt through bone and muscle. Her hand seized a clamp, driving the locking pin home with a crack that rang louder than the jeers ever had. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then the silence came. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of shock, of a crew forced to see what they had missed all along. Every gaze locked on her, not on the sailor she had saved, not on the missile secured by sheer will and instinct. On her shoulder. Her sleeve had slipped, barring the cloth beneath, red and black, a patch no one should have seen. Whispers hissed through the deck like steam. Spectre Division. Most had only heard the name in rumors. A ghost unit. Stories whispered in training halls, buried in classified files, spoken of the way children spoke of monsters under their beds. A unit erased from history, too dangerous to survive the politics of peacetime. And yet here it was, on her arm. Lyra tugged her sleeve back into place, but it was too late. The image had already burned into the eyes of every man and woman on deck. The officer of the watch finally found his voice, barking for damage control teams. Men scrambled, but their movements lacked rhythm now. They weren't simply securing ordnance anymore. They were orbiting around her, their motions hesitant, their eyes betraying questions they dared not ask aloud. The sailor she had dragged clear sat against the bulkhead, gasping, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked at her with something beyond gratitude. It was suspicion. It was fear. And it spread. Above them, the command platform loomed, and from it descended Admiral Hale. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. Each step was weight, pressing against the air, carrying years of command like iron links. He was a man carved from salt and storms, the kind of presence that bent silence around him. His eyes weren't on the missile. They weren't on the sailor Lyra had saved. They were locked on her. On the patch. He stopped before her, close enough that the smell of salt and scorched steel mingled between them. "You secured the ordnance," he said at last. His voice was level, unhurried, but edged with something harder. "Yes, sir," she answered. Her voice was steady, stripped of pride or apology. "And that patch," he continued, eyes narrowing, "where did you acquire it?" The question cut deeper than any reprimand. A ripple ran through the crew. Men shifted uneasily, eyes darting, whispers scratching the edges of silence. The name surfaced again, softer this time, almost reverent. Spectre Division. Lyra didn't answer. She tightened one last clamp on the missile cradle, stepped back, and said nothing. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't surrender. It was something sharper. The refusal to dignify the question with words. The Admiral studied her longer, the silence between them heavier than steel. His jaw worked once, then stilled. "Resume your stations," he said at last, voice curt. The sailors obeyed, boots clanging, tools clattering. But the rhythm was broken. They worked, yes, but every motion circled her, every glance betraying unease. She wiped the sweat from her brow, but it wasn't sweat she felt. It was memory, pressing hard. The way her body had moved when the cable snapped. It hadn't been instinct, not the way the Navy trained its sailors. It had been drilled into her long before she ever set foot on this ship. Training no logistics clerk was supposed to have. Training from shadows. Above them, the sky stretched hard and blue across the Mediterranean, endless and uncaring. But below, tension crawled like a current through steel. Respect wasn't what she heard in the silence, it was caution. Beneath it, fear. The men and women of the Horizon had braved storms, fire, and warheads, but they had never faced the unknown, and she embodied it. The Admiral lingered a moment longer before returning to his post, but his gaze never left her. Lyra bent to her work again, checking clamps, bolts, ties. Her motions were steady, but each carried an edge of finality, as though she were sealing not just the missile but the secret she had let slip. Yet it was too late. Secrets, once seen, could never be unseen. And every soul on that deck now carried the same question, unspoken but burning. Who exactly was Lyra Vance? She had no intention of answering. Not here, not yet. Why hadn't she stayed invisible? Why now? The missile was steady again, locked into its cradle, cables taut, bolts sealed. The deck hummed with the ordinary noise of naval life, shouted commands, tools clattering, engines throbbing deep in the hull. Yet nothing was ordinary anymore. Not after what they had seen. The laughter that had once mocked her had vanished, leaving behind a silence thick enough to bend spines. Men moved about their duties, but their eyes betrayed them. They weren't looking at the missile racks. They weren't watching the sea. They were watching her. Lyra forced herself to ignore it, her hands running across clamps and valves, checking, rechecking, touching steel like an old adversary. But the weight of their gazes pressed harder than the sun. She had worked years to perfect the art of blending in, of being background. Now a single rupture of cable had dragged her into sight. The sailor she had saved lingered nearby. His face was pale, sweat streaking his temple, breath shallow. He wanted to thank her, she could see it, but gratitude tangled with something sharper, and he said nothing. His silence was a question. "Who are you?" She offered him no answer. From the command rail above, Admiral Hale's eyes remained locked on her. He had said nothing more since that single question. But silence, in the hands of a commander like him, was heavier than shouting. She tugged her sleeve higher, covering the patch. The fabric hid it, but the image was already seared into the crew's minds. Then the ship's calm fractured. A siren wailed, sharp enough to slice steel. Red lights strobed along the bulkheads, painting every face in a crimson wash. "Contact incoming." The loudspeaker's voice thundered across the deck. Hostile launch detected, bearing east, closing fast. Adrenaline hit like a current. Boots pounded. Officers barked orders. Sailors sprinted to stations, unlocking consoles, slamming hatches, securing gear. The deck of the Horizon shifted into the choreography of combat, each man and woman pulled by training drilled into their bones. But beneath the rhythm was fear. Lyra turned toward the bridge. Through the glass, she saw shapes hunched over radar screens, hands flying. Their movements were frantic, their silhouettes telling her what she already knew. This wasn't a drill. Someone had fired on them. "Stand by Tomahawk battery," the order cracked across the deck. Crewmen converged on the launch racks, faces set with urgency. Hatches yawned open, steel tubes gleaming in the sun, waiting to breathe fire. Then a voice cracked. "Malfunction, tube 3 not cycling." The words slammed into them harder than any shell. A petty officer stared at the console, his face draining pale. Load sequence frozen. Men swarmed the system, hands flying across switches, but the lights refused to change. Amber blinked. Warnings scrolled across panels, meaningless to those who hadn't lived with these weapons. The deck shuddered as another announcement cut through the noise. "Enemy missile, 3 minutes to impact." 3 minutes. Not enough time to wait for engineering. Not enough time for manuals or trial and error. Lyra's chest tightened. She had seen this exact jam before, years ago, in circumstances no one here could imagine. It was the hydraulics, a flaw buried deep, only triggered when stress loads aligned just wrong. No textbook mentioned it, no training course prepared for it. But she knew it. Her body knew it. An officer shoved men back, shouting for engineering to handle it. Tools clattered, hands at bolts they barely understood, but the seconds bled away too fast. 90 seconds gone. 2 minutes left. Lyra felt the pull in her muscles before she made the choice. Her world narrowed to the pounding in her chest. She stepped forward. "Vance, stay clear," one of the officers barked, voice cracking with panic. "This isn't your station." She didn't stop. The engineers parted instinctively. Some protested, others shifted with relief, as if on some deep level they already knew she belonged there. Lyra crouched by the control bank, fingers brushing levers and seals like greeting old friends. The steel was the same. The sequence was the same. Memory layered itself over reality, pulling her back into another crisis, another deck, another set of lives hanging in the balance. She closed her eyes for one heartbeat, inhaled, exhaled. Then she moved. Her hands worked in a blur, but nothing was rushed. It was choreography, practiced, drilled, perfected. Manual override, release sequence, pressure bleed, reset, prime. The words whispered from her lips like a prayer. Amber lights flickered, wavered, shifted to green. The hydraulics groaned, shuddered, then locked into place. "System reset complete," Lyra said, her voice calm despite the thunder in her veins. For a heartbeat, silence clung to the deck. Then the officer of the battery roared, "Cycle complete, launch authorized." A cheer erupted, but it died almost as quickly. Because the loudspeaker cracked again. "Impact in 90 seconds." The hatch yawned open. The Tomahawk gleamed inside, nose pointed toward the invisible horizon. The deck shuddered as the launch sequence engaged. Heat and smoke vented through the exhaust channels, thunder building in the steel bones of the ship. The missile roared free. A contrail slashed the sky, a white spear hurled against the unseen threat. On the bridge, Admiral Hale's silhouette didn't move. He didn't celebrate. He didn't cheer. His eyes remained locked on her. He had seen her hands. He had seen the unhesitating sequence. And he knew. The crew broke into applause, clapping backs, gasping relief. But not all. Those closest to her didn't cheer. They stared, the question in their eyes louder than celebration. "Who are you?" Lyra tugged her sleeve higher, covering the patch. But it was too late. Concealment didn't matter anymore. The truth was already moving through the ship like fire through dry grass. The intercom's voice broke the tension. "Enemy projectile neutralized. Intercept successful." Relief crashed like a wave. Some cheered again, louder this time. Others slumped against railings, adrenaline breaking into trembling laughter. But Admiral Hale did not laugh. He descended from the platform, each step deliberate. The crew parted around him, an unspoken circle forming. His eyes never left her. "You knew what you were doing," he said, his tone flat, sharp as a blade. "I did what was necessary," she replied. "Necessary," he repeated, gaze sliding to the sealed hatches, smoke still drifting. Then back to her, his voice lowered, pitched so the nearest could still hear. "That was not training issued to you here. Those aren't procedures you pick up from manuals. Where did you learn it?" Her silence stretched. Her eyes were steady, refusing to confirm, refusing to deny. The officer of the watch approached, data slate in hand. "Diagnostics, sir." Hale took it, never breaking his stare. The log confirmed every move she had made, each correction executed in perfect sequence. Irrefutable. He dismissed the officer with a flick of his hand. His voice carried across the circle. "Spectre Division, you carry its mark, and now you demonstrate its hand." A murmur surged, gasps, whispers, older sailors exchanging glances like ghosts clawing from memory. Lyra's lips pressed thin. She turned back to the launcher, touching a valve that didn't need touching, anything to break the weight of his words. "Answer me," Hale pressed. She met his eyes. "What would you have me say, Admiral? That I've seen things I should, that I know patterns that don't exist? Would it make a difference?" Something flickered in his gaze, not anger, recognition. For a moment his mask cracked, and she saw it, the shadow of memory. He knew more than he wanted to admit. The crew leaned in, straining to catch the exchange. The circle around them drew. The silence grew dangerous, curiosity outweighing fear. Hale stepped closer, his voice lower, meant only for her but audible enough. "That program was buried for a reason. No records, no survivors." His gaze dipped briefly to her covered arm. "Yet here you stand." Her silence was confirmation enough. Behind them the sea stretched calm and endless. But above the calm, tension mounted like storm clouds no one could see. For sailors trained to fight visible enemies, the unseen was unbearable, and Lyra embodied it more than any missile. One of the younger crewmen blurted, unable to resist, "Sir, what is Spectre Division?" The question cracked the air. Hale's glare cut him down, sharp enough to silence. "It's nothing you need to know." But the damage was done, the spark had caught, the question would not die. Lyra inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had endured interrogations before, but this wasn't an interrogation. This was worse. This was trust unraveling. Hale broke the moment with a sharp command. "Return to your duties." The circle fractured. Men drifted back, but glances still lingered. Whispers followed her like shadows. But Hale remained. He turned on his heel. "Walk with me." And without waiting for her consent, he strode into the shadow of the superstructure. Lyra followed, boots striking in rhythm with his. Neither spoke until the noise of the deck faded, replaced by the hum of passageways. Then Hale pivoted, face shadowed under the dim lights. "You forced my hand," he said, voice low, growling. "The crew has seen too much. Whatever past you've tried to bury is on the surface now." "I didn't ask for this," Lyra shot back. "I tried to stay quiet, but when steel snaps and lives hang in the balance, silence isn't an option." His eyes narrowed. "You think I don't recognize the way you moved out there? I signed the order to dissolve that unit. I read every report that claimed no survivors. And yet," his words cracked like a whip, "here you are." Her expression faltered for the first time, just for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Then you already know enough. Leave it there." The Admiral's breath hissed through his teeth. He studied her for cracks, but she gave him nothing. At last he exhaled, long and heavy, the sound of someone wrestling with ghosts. "We are not finished," he said. "But for now, your skill saved this ship. That is the only reason you're not in chains." Lyra inclined her head, not gratitude, not submission, just acknowledgement. And then she walked back toward the deck. Every eye followed. Respect, suspicion, fear. She didn't look at them. She kept her gaze on the horizon. Because she knew the worst wasn't over. Not from the enemy. And not from within. How many times could a secret survive daylight? The Mediterranean stretched endless and deceptively calm, but calm seas rarely told the truth. The horizon cut through the water with steady purpose, its wake curling into white lines that vanished quickly in the sun. On deck, sailors moved, but rhythm was gone. They worked as though under watchful eyes, each glance darting back toward her. Lyra pretended not to notice. Pretended she was nothing more than a technician checking lines, tightening bolts, running her hands over clamps that were already secure. But she felt it in the air, the weight of questions, of rumors passed in low voices. Spectre Division, the words clung to the steel. Above them, Admiral Hale stood on the command rail, his posture rigid, his gaze never leaving her. Even when he barked orders to his officers, his eyes would return, sharp and unblinking. Lyra tugged at her sleeve again, but it was pointless. The patch might be hidden, but the truth was, she had revealed too much. Twice now she had moved with knowledge no ordinary sailor could possess. Twice she had saved them, and in saving them, undone herself. She leaned against the railing, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. For a moment she let her eyes drift to the horizon, away from the whispers, away from the suspicion. But peace didn't last. The alarm shattered it. A wail deeper this time, not the sharp call of drills, not the urgent but singular pitch of a lone missile. This was heavier, relentless. The loudspeaker boomed. Multiple launches detected. Inbound strike package. Impact window closing fast. Chaos surged. Orders flew. Sailors sprinted. The machine of war shook itself awake once more. Lyra moved with them, blending into the tide of bodies without hesitation. She didn't need a briefing. She knew what it meant. This wasn't an isolated strike. This was pressure, relentless, grinding, meant to bleed them dry. Above the noise, Admiral Hale's voice cut sharp. Prepare for counter-launch. All batteries hot. The order steadied the crew. Boots slammed. Hatches groaned. The deck shuddered as the first salvo of Tomahawks primed, hydraulics hissing, steel tubes aligning for release. Then another blow fell. System fault, battery 2 offline, a technician shouted, voice breaking through the noise. Head snapped toward him, eyes widened. Panic rippled across the deck. Battery 2 was vital. Without it, their response would be crippled. The crew rushed to the console, tearing open panels, sparks spitting as wires hissed. Hands fumbled at valves, eyes wide at error codes that bloomed across screens. Lyra's gut clenched. The problem was different from the first jam, but no less catastrophic. She recognized it instantly, a cracked seal deep inside the relay, a failure she had been taught to expect in places no manual admitted existed. Her fists tightened at her sides. Hale's warning echoed in her mind. Every eye is on you. She knew what it would mean to step forward again. Each intervention was another nail in the coffin of her cover. But as the intercom barked again, impact window, 5 minutes, she saw the tremor in sailors' hands, the panic fraying their discipline. If she stayed silent, men would die. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She pushed past a petty officer, her voice sharp, "Clear this station." The words rang with a tone she hadn't used in years. Not the quiet tone of the command of someone trained to be obeyed. The petty officer froze, startled, but obeyed. She dropped to her knees by the relay housing, eyes scanning the mess of wiring. She saw it instantly, a deliberate bypass scorched black, not accident, sabotage. Her pulse surged. She stripped off a glove, grabbed a pair of cutters and set to work. Her hands moved with controlled fury, stripping wires, rerouting lines, ignoring every protocol. A sailor at her side whispered, half in awe, half in fear, "That's not in the manuals." "No," she snapped, not looking up. "It is." Her hands danced. Cut, splice, reroute. Pressure hissed as she bled steam from a damaged line. She forced the current through a manual regulator, slamming it into place. The console lights flickered. Amber. Green. System stabilized. A sailor cried, voice breaking. The announcement rippled like thunder. Relief cracked across the deck. But Admiral Hale's voice followed instantly, sharper than steel. "Focus on the launch. Fire now." The deck erupted again. Tubes roared, smoke vented. Tomahawks screamed skyward in white arcs, racing to meet death in the air. Lyra staggered back, chest heaving. Sweat slicked her face, hair plastered to her temple. But she didn't collapse. She stood steady, eyes locked on the horizon. She felt their stares again, heavier now than ever. Not only had she saved them once more, she had commanded them, directed them. And the Admiral had seen it. Above, Hale's silhouette loomed against the smoke-streaked sky, his knuckles white on the rail. The intercom crackled. Enemy strike package intercepted, all targets destroyed. Relief washed again, but thinner this time. The cheers were weaker, fractured, because relief no longer masked the truth spreading like wildfire. They were alive because of her. Not because of manuals, not because of training, because of knowledge no one should have. Hale raised his voice, cutting across the murmurs. "Crew of the Horizon, remember your duty. We endure not by chance but by resolve. Return to your stations. We are not finished." The words steadied them, but only barely. Discipline returned, but whispers didn't die. Lyra adjusted her sleeve again, a futile gesture now. The patch didn't matter anymore. They had seen enough without it. She walked to the rail, letting the sea wash her face with spray. For a fleeting moment she closed her eyes, listening to the crash of waves, trying to find silence inside the noise. But it was gone. Because she knew symbols never lived long in peace. The footsteps came, measured, heavy. She turned slightly. Admiral Hale descended from the bridge again, eyes locked on her. "You've shown your hand twice now," he said low. His tone was not for the crew, it was for her alone. "The next move isn't yours to choose." Lyra's lips tightened. Her eyes met his. For the first time, defiance flickered in her expression. "Then make your move, Admiral," she said. "I'm done hiding." The words hung between them, sharp as steel, as the horizon plowed forward into seas that glittered under sunlight, but promised storms unseen. And for the first time, she felt the truth pressing closer. The real battle hadn't even begun. How long could suspicion hold when survival demanded trust? The horizon rode the swells like a blade cutting water, its decks slick with salt spray and smoke. The crew moved in tight rhythm again, but their eyes betrayed the strain. They weren't simply fighting the enemy anymore. They were fighting what they'd just witnessed. Spectre division, a patch, a rumor, a ghost made flesh. And the ghost walked among them, silent, sleeves tugged down, face set like stone. Lyra felt their gazes cut across her back, felt the weight of whispers rise and die each time she passed. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd endured worse. Silence was her armor, but armor didn't soften suspicion, it hardened it. The Admiral hadn't spoken to her since their last confrontation, but she knew he was watching. He always was. She felt his presence like a shadow at her back, heavy, unyielding. The calm didn't last. The radar's alarm split the air again, higher, faster, insistent. Surface contacts, multiple fast movers on approach. The announcement sucked the air from the deck, missiles they had handled, but this was different. Gunboats, swarm tactics, enemy vessels racing low across the water, bristling with weapons, closing the gap before long-range ordnance could silence them. The intercom roared. All hands prepare for close engagement. Boots thundered, hatches clanged. The horizon stirred to war, its steel bones alive with movement. Anti-air batteries pivoted. Machine guns swung into position. Missile racks sealed. The hum of engines deepened as the ship braced for maneuver. Lyra's chest tightened. She had seen this tactic before, not from textbooks but from memory. Gunboats darting like hornets, trading armor for speed. Missiles could thin their numbers, but not enough. Once inside 1,000 yards, it would be chaos. The first shells screamed across the waves, geysers erupting near the bow. Spray drenched the deck. Sailors flinched, ducked, then surged back to their stations. Targeting systems online, a tech barked, designating hostiles. Static swallowed his words, screens flickered, consoles dimmed. Jamming, someone shouted. The enemy had cut their eyes. Radar blinded, targeting dead. For a moment panic clawed at discipline. Voices rose, too sharp, too high, the kind of panic that spread fast. Lyra's hands clenched the railing. Her mind spun back to another sea, another storm of fire. She remembered how Spectre had trained for this exact moment, when technology failed, when the enemy stripped you bare. They had trained to fight blind. She knew what had to be done, but every step forward meant another piece of herself surrendered. Another nail driven into the coffin of her silence. A shell slammed close, shaking the deck. A spray of shrapnel whined past her ear, embedding in steel. Crew scattered, fear flared. She moved. "Get to manual targeting," she barked, striding toward the gunnery station. "Bypass digital, go analog." Heads snapped. Sailors froze, caught between orders they knew and a voice they weren't supposed to follow. Another blast rocked the ship, closer this time. Men cursed, ducked. The chaos widened. Lyra shoved a petty officer aside and dropped to the manual sight controls, fingers flying across rusted levers few even remembered existed. "Zero by eye," she snapped. "Compensate for crosswind, half-second lead. Fire in threes, not singles. Watch the wakes." The officer beside her stammered, "How do you?" "Just do it." Her voice cracked like a whip. For a breath the chaos froze. Then discipline snapped back, men scrambling to obey. The first volley roared from the barrels, thundering across the sea. Tracers arced low, white against blue. And struck true. The lead gunboat erupted in flame, its hull shattering in spray and smoke. A cheer went up, sharp, desperate, alive. Lyra didn't join it. Her eyes scanned the water, calculating angles, speeds, vectors. Numbers unrolled in her mind, instinctual, drilled. She shouted adjustments, guiding fire as though the ship were her own weapon. One by one, the enemy boats closed, and one by one she cut them down. Not all, some slipped through, guns spitting. Bullets ripped across the deck, sparking against steel, tearing splinters from railings. A sailor screamed, clutching his shoulder. Medics dragged him back as fire rained around them. Lyra gritted her teeth, refusing to flinch. The horizon thundered with return fire, guided by her commands. Another boat shattered, then another. The sea burned with smoke and oil, waves churning black. Still they came. And still she answered. Her voice rose above the chaos, steady, unyielding, directing, correcting, commanding. Until at last the final gunboat faltered, its hull breaking apart under the barrage. It slipped beneath the waves, swallowed by smoke and fire. The sea quieted. Silence fell. For a long moment, only the groan of steel and the labored breaths of sailors filled the air. Then the cheers came, ragged but fierce. Relief broke across the deck like sunlight through storm clouds. But not all eyes held gratitude. Some held awe, others unease. Because what she had done was undeniable now. She hadn't just saved them, she had led them. From the bridge, Admiral Hale descended once more, boots striking the deck in measured cadence. The crew parted, their cheers dimming to silence. He stopped before her. "You gave orders on my deck," he said. She met his gaze, unflinching. "Your deck was about to sink. I did what was necessary." His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, silence pressed between them. Then he spoke low. "That wasn't Navy procedure. That was Spectre doctrine." Whispers rippled through the circle. Lyra's throat tightened. She said nothing. Silence was all she had left. Hale studied her, eyes hard. Then to the crew his voice rang louder. "She acted. She saved lives, remember that." The words steadied them. A nod of authority, a balm against fear. But his gaze, when it returned to her, carried no softness. "Walk with me," he ordered. She followed, the whispers trailing behind like shadows. They moved below deck, into the narrow passageways, the hum of engines vibrating through steel. At last, away from eyes and ears, Hale stopped. His voice was a growl. "You've crossed the line, Vance, 3 times now. Once could been instinct, twice luck, but this was doctrine. This was leadership no one gave you the right to claim." Her chest rose and fell, the words pressing deep. "I didn't choose this," she said. "But you know as well as I do, when steel and blood are on the line, hesitation kills. I won't watch men die when I can stop it." His eyes narrowed. "And at what cost? Your cover is gone," the crew whispers. "They'll follow you now, not me." Her jaw clenched. "I don't want their loyalty." "But you have it," he snapped, his voice lower, dangerous. "And if you can't control it, it will control you." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, filled only by the thrum of engines. Then he said quietly, "Tell me the truth. Spectre Division, what happened to it?" Her eyes darkened. She looked away into the steel walls as if they might hold the answer. Finally she said, voice low, raw, "They buried us, wrote us out of records, said we were too dangerous, too unstable. They called it disbandment, but you and I both know what it was." Hale's eyes flickered, recognition, memory. "And you survived," he said. Her lips pressed tight. She didn't answer. For the first time, something softened in his voice. "Why come back? Why hide under another name, another life?" Her gaze met his again, steady. "Because ghosts don't get second chances. And this was all I had left." Hale studied her, his face unreadable. Then he turned, voice curt. "Return to your station. This conversation isn't over." Lyra walked back to the deck, her boots echoing in narrow halls. Above, the sky was clear again, the sea calm. But she knew it wouldn't last. The enemy would strike again. And now, every eye on the horizon knew the truth. She was no ordinary sailor. And the question hanging over all of them was no longer, who is she? It was this: what happens when the ghost no longer hides? How long could a ship hold together when its crew no longer trusted the same shadow? The horizon cut through gray water now, skies heavy with clouds that smothered the sun. The sea was calm, but tension inside the steel was not. Sailors moved along the deck with less rhythm, more hesitation. Their boots struck steel, but their eyes darted, searching, questioning. Orders were followed, but slower, dulled by whispers too loud to be ignored. Lyra felt it with every step. She could hear her name in the half-formed murmurs. Not Vance anymore, not supply tech. Spectre, ghost, shadow. Some whispered it with awe, as if the title was a shield against the fire that had rained on them days before. Others said it with fear, as if she herself had brought that fire with her. She tried to move unseen again, sleeves tugged down, posture small. But there was no vanishing now. The patch on her shoulder might be hidden, but the truth was not. She had led them. She had given orders no one else could. And once seen, a leader cannot go back to silence. From the bridge, Admiral Hale watched the crew with the precision of a man weighing more than just tactics. His eyes measured morale as carefully as he measured horizons. And he saw what she saw: division. When he summoned her that evening, it was not into shadowed passageways but into the wardroom. Bright lights, polished steel, a deliberate stage. Officers lined the table, their faces grim. Charts and reports scattered before them, but none of it mattered. All eyes went to her when she entered. Hale stood at the head of the table, his arms folded, his gaze cold. "Chief Vance," he said, his voice carried the weight of judgment. "You forced this ship into a crisis of trust. Men follow your commands without hesitation, but they question the chain of command that binds them to me. That cannot stand." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I never asked them to follow." "But they do," an officer snapped from the left, "and it's tearing this crew apart." Another leaned forward, his face pale but sharp. "Spectre Division was erased for a reason. God knows what they built you for. Maybe this was always the risk." The words landed like blows. She held her silence, but inside her chest, anger smoldered. They spoke as if she were a weapon, not a woman. As if saving their lives had been nothing more than a glitch in a dangerous machine. Finally she said, her voice steady, "I am not your enemy." The officer sneered. "Then prove it, stop interfering." Her eyes burned into him. "Stop interfering and let you die when the next strike comes." The room crackled with tension. Hale's voice cut it, low, sharp, "Enough." He looked at her, his face carved from stone. "Do you know what your presence does, Vance? Do you know the danger of half-truths? Men fill silence with fear, and fear tears ships apart." Her jaw tightened. "Then let them hear the truth." The table stilled. Hale's eyes narrowed. For a moment silence pressed like a weight. Then slowly he shook his head. "No, some truths do more damage than lies, if they knew what Spectre was built to do." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The officers glanced at one another, uneasy. Some already guessed. Some feared to ask. Lyra stood, her voice hard. "You can bury programs. You can bury names, but you can't bury what survives. I didn't choose to be here, but you need me. And you know it." The words struck deep. She saw it in Hale's eyes, the flicker of recognition, the memory of a report that had crossed his desk long ago, one he had tried to forget. Silence stretched, heavy and unresolved. Then he dismissed her with a single gesture. "Return to your station." She turned and left, but the air in the passageways felt heavier than before. That night she lay awake in her bunk, the hum of the engines thrumming through the steel like a heartbeat. Around her, the berthing was restless. Men whispered in low voices, their words threading through the dark. She knew exactly what to do. "Saw the patch myself. If she's Spectre, what else is she hiding?" She closed her eyes, tried to block it out, but each whisper was a knife. She thought of her training, of endless nights under fluorescent lights, of instructors who told them they were not soldiers but instruments. They had stripped away names, faces, even hope, until only function remained. And yet here she was, still human, still bleeding inside every time she heard their fear. The next morning, division showed itself plain. On deck, as the crew drilled damage control, two men refused to stand beside her. They shifted positions, glaring as though her shadow carried poison. Another sailor brushed past and muttered just loud enough, "Spectre witch." Her body tensed, but she didn't react. She had endured worse. She had endured them before. But others noticed. A younger sailor, the one whose life she had saved during the first jam, stepped up beside her. His eyes were wide, uncertain, but he stood firm. "She saved us," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Twice, don't forget that." Murmurs rose, sharp and divided. Some nodded, some spat curses. The ship was fracturing. Admiral Hale watched from above, his expression unreadable. But Lyra saw the weight in his shoulders. He knew what she knew. Unity was dying. And without unity, a ship was nothing but steel adrift. By evening, it came to a head. She was in the corridor outside the mess when the group cornered her. 4 sailors, faces hard, eyes sharp with something darker than discipline. The leader stepped close, his voice low, venomous. "You think we don't see it? You think we don't know what you are? You're not one of us. You're something they buried for a reason, and we won't let you drag us down with you." Her chest tightened. She measured the space, their stances, the angles. Old instincts whispered strategies, but she didn't move, didn't lift a hand. "I'm not your enemy," she said quietly. The sailor's lip curled. Maybe not yet. A hand went to his knife. Before steel cleared the sheath, a voice thundered down the corridor. "Stand down." The sailors froze. Admiral Hale strode into view, his glare burning like fire. His presence alone pulled the knife back, forced the men to step away. But the damage was done. Division wasn't rumor anymore. It was action. Hale's voice was a growl. "Return to your posts before I strip you of rank." They scattered, boots slamming steel. Lyra stood silent, her pulse hammering, her chest burning with something heavier than fear. Hale turned to her, his face tight. "This ship is breaking in half, and you're the fulcrum." Her eyes met his, steady but weary. "Then what do you want me to do? Keep hiding? Pretend I don't know how to keep them alive?" His silence was the answer. He didn't know. And in that silence, she realized the truth pressing harder than any enemy fire. The greatest danger wasn't outside on the sea. It was here, within the steel walls of the Horizon. And it had already begun to tear them apart. How long could a ship fight the enemy outside, when the enemy inside sharpened its knives? The Horizon pressed eastward through restless seas, its hull groaning against the weight of weather. Storm clouds had rolled in, low and dark, veiling the horizon in shifting walls of gray. The crew worked, but not in rhythm. The fracture inside the steel had deepened, and every man felt it. Lyra felt it most of all. When she passed in the corridor, voices cut short. When she entered the mess, silence spread like a shadow. Some men avoided her eyes altogether. Others glared with unmasked hostility. Only a few still carried gratitude in their gaze, and even that was cracked by doubt. Spectre, ghost, witch, savior. She had become all of it at once, and none of it. Admiral Hale carried the tension on his shoulders like an anchor. Orders still cut sharp from his lips, but behind his eyes there was a weight no command could erase. He saw his crew splitting down invisible lines, men choosing sides, whispers mutating into loyalties. And then the sea delivered the blow they could least afford. The alarm split the ship at dusk, red lights bathing steel in a hellish glow. Sirens wailed, orders snapped. Incoming strike, multiple vectors, airborne and surface. The bridge erupted, screens flashed red. Consoles rattled under the strain of data streaming in too much, too fast. Lyra shoved through the chaos to the forward deck, the salt wind slamming against her face. The sky beyond the bow was alive with fire. Distant flares streaked downward, each one a promise of destruction. This wasn't a probing attack. This was annihilation. Missiles from above, gunboats below, a coordinated strike meant to smother them in fire. Her chest clenched tight. She had seen drills like this, back when she wore the patch openly, when Spectre trained for the scenarios commanders swore would never come. Overwhelming fire from every angle, a test designed not to be survived. And here it was. The deck thundered as sailors scrambled, orders clashed, batteries spun. Machine guns roared to life, but there was no rhythm, no cohesion. One missile slipped past the first intercept, slamming into the water too close. The shockwave rattled the horizon, steel shrieking in protest. Spray drenched the deck, men staggering under the blast. Another missile streaked lower. Gunners swung, fired too late. It exploded against the aft hull. Fire erupted, alarms howling in protest. Smoke billowed across the deck. The ship screamed. And still the enemy came. Lyra's pulse hammered. She turned and saw the fracture play out before her eyes. Some sailors froze, caught between orders. Others shouted at one another, conflicting commands tangling in the smoke. One officer barked orders ignored. A younger sailor followed Lyra's movements with his eyes, waiting, almost begging for her voice. It hit her then, the truth she had tried to deny. Silence would not save them. If she stayed quiet now, the Horizon would die. Her throat burned. Fear clawed her ribs. Every word she might speak would drive the knife deeper into her cover, into whatever shred of anonymity she had left. But she spoke. Starboard battery fire at 5-second intervals. Machine guns, focus low, cut the boats before they close. The words cracked through smoke like a whip. Men hesitated only a heartbeat, then obeyed. Desperation was stronger than doubt. The first volley slammed out, cutting the waves into fire. Gunboats exploded into splinters, their hulls vanishing beneath white spray. Another missile screamed low. She turned, shouted corrections, her mind calculating vectors the way Spectre had drilled it into her bones. The intercept fired, met the missile midair. The explosion lit the night like a second sun. Cheers rose, ragged, fierce. But the fracture was not gone. Through the smoke, she saw them, sailors who ignored her, who stayed frozen at their posts, waiting only for the Admiral's voice. Division still tore them, even as fire rained down. And then she heard it, a shout. Why are we listening to her? A petty officer stood near the aft gun, his face twisted with fear and fury. She's not command, she's Spectre. She'll get us all killed. For a heartbeat, men wavered. Fire rained, steel groaned, and the crew hesitated. Admiral Hale's voice roared across the deck, breaking the paralysis. Obey the command that keeps you alive. His words cut like steel. His eyes locked on her, hard but steady. In that single moment he lent her his authority, not willingly, not fully, but enough. The crew surged again. Orders obeyed, guns roared, missiles intercepted, boats shattered. But not all. One slipped through, closing fast, guns spitting fire. Bullets screamed across the deck, tearing into railings, punching holes into steel. Men dove for cover. Lyra spun toward the gun, shouted angles, led fire. Tracers ripped across the water, slicing the boat into flame before it could strike. The blast rattled her chest, the heat licking across her skin, but she didn't falter, she didn't stop. She gave orders, one after another, her voice steady. Her body ached with strain. Minutes stretched like hours, but finally the last missile streaked skyward and was torn apart by intercept fire. The sea stilled. Smoke hung heavy. Flames licked at twisted steel. Medics dragged the wounded across blackened decks. The Horizon groaned, battered but afloat. Silence fell, broken only by coughs and the crackle of fire. Then cheers erupted, ragged but real. Relief surged. They had survived what should have been impossible. Lyra staggered back, her chest heaving, her throat raw. She looked around at the faces lit by firelight. Some looked at her with gratitude, others with fear. But all of them had heard her voice. And all of them had obeyed. The fracture had not healed, but it had shifted. The line was no longer between her and them. It was between those who accepted her and those who would never forgive her. Admiral Hale descended to the deck, his face carved with stone. His eyes swept the ruin, the smoke, the crew. Then they fixed on her. "You saved us again," he said quietly. Her throat tightened, at a cost. He nodded grim, yes, at a cost. She waited for condemnation, for the order that would bind her silence again, but it never came. Instead, he said, "Tomorrow we bury our dead, and after that we decide what you truly are to this crew." His eyes burned into hers, unyielding. "And what you are to me." He turned away, his boots echoing against scorched steel. Lyra stood alone, the smoke curling around her, the sea whispering against the hull. She had stepped fully into the light now. There was no going back. The question wasn't if her secret would destroy her. It was when. How do you mourn the dead when the living are already at war with each other? The Horizon lay battered but afloat, smoke still curling from her scorched skin. The storm had passed, leaving behind a restless gray sea that mirrored the crew's faces. They buried the dead at dawn. The ceremony was brief, as it always was at sea. No music, no words too long, just bodies wrapped in flags slid across steel into the arms of the ocean. The sound of each splash cut deeper than gunfire. Lyra stood apart, her hands clenched behind her back, eyes locked on the horizon. She felt the weight of stares at her shoulders, some hard with blame, others soft with gratitude, few with indifference. When the last body slipped beneath the waves, Admiral Hale's voice carried over the deck. "They fought with honor, they died as sailors. Let us not dishonor them with division." His words hung heavy, some nodded, some turned away. The fracture was still there, sharp as ever. That night, whispers became louder than the engines. Lyra sat in the dim mess, untouched coffee cooling in her hands. The room buzzed with low voices. She caught fragments, her name, the word specter, the venom in certain tones. Not Navy, not even supposed to exist. Saved us, sure, but at what cost? What if she turns on us next? Then another voice, firm but younger, cut through. She saved us twice. Maybe stop looking for monsters where there aren't any. Chairs scraped. A hush fell. Lyra didn't turn to look. She knew that voice, the same young sailor who had stood up for her before. She closed her eyes, the coffee trembling in her grip. Gratitude and guilt twisted inside her chest. He defended her because she saved him. But who defended him when she wasn't there? Later in the corridor, Admiral Hale intercepted her. His face was carved with fatigue, eyes shadowed by lack of sleep. "Mutiny whispers," he said without preamble. Her throat tightened. "Against me." His gaze didn't waver. "Against both of us. They see me letting you take control. They see you as a threat I can't contain, and they're right in their way." The words stung, sharper than enemy fire. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Do you believe that?" He didn't answer at first. Then slowly, "I believe you've saved lives. I also believe you're tearing this ship in half." Silence pressed heavy between them. Finally she whispered, "Then relieve me, lock me below deck, give them what they want." His jaw tightened. "And when the next wave comes, when I'm dead and the crew panics, who leads them then?" She had no answer. The Admiral's eyes softened barely. "I don't trust you, not fully, but I trust what you can do, and right now that's all we have." He turned, leaving her in the narrow passageway with the hum of engines and the weight of impossible choices. By the next evening, division cracked wide open. On deck, as the crew drilled emergency procedures, a fight broke out. Two sailors, one shouting her name like a curse, the other shouting it like a prayer. Fists flew, others piled in. Shouts erupted, boots pounding steel. The alarm sounded, not for enemy fire but for their own collapse. Lyra pushed through the crowd, shouting for them to stop, but her voice was drowned in the chaos. Men clawed, shoved, cursed, rage and grief spilling out in equal measure. Then Admiral Hale's voice thundered through the intercom. "Enough!" The word cracked through the ship like cannon fire. The brawl froze. Men staggered back, panting, bleeding, shame creeping into their eyes. Hale strode into the circle, his gaze like a blade. "This ends now. You don't have to like her. You don't have to trust her, but you will not fight each other while the enemy circles. Not while I breathe." His eyes swept the crowd, then landed on Lyra. For a long heartbeat he held her gaze, then he turned and walked away. The crew dispersed, but the fracture didn't vanish. It went underground, sharper, more dangerous. That night Lyra sat alone in her bunk, the hum of engines pressing against her ribs. She stared at the patch tucked deep in her locker, hidden but not gone. The specter skull stared back at her in the dim light, its grin mocking. She thought of the men who had bled today, fists and knives turned against each other instead of the enemy. Thought of the sailor who defended her, who would carry scars for it. Thought of the Admiral, torn between command and survival. Her chest ached with a truth she could no longer bury. Silence was killing them faster than any missile. She closed the locker, her reflection faint in the steel. She looked hollow, a ghost in her own skin. The next morning the crew gathered on deck for inspection. The air was heavy, thick with storm clouds pressing low. Admiral Hale stood before them, his voice sharp. "We face another strike soon. I can feel it. You will fight it together, or you will not live to fight at all." Murmurs spread, some nodded, others muttered, eyes darted toward her. And then, before she could stop herself, Lyra stepped forward. Her voice cut the air. "They need to hear it." Hale turned, his eyes narrowing. "Hear what?" Her heart pounded. She felt the crew's stares burn against her skin. She hadn't meant to speak, not yet, but the words clawed their way free. "The truth." The deck stilled. Even the sea seemed to pause. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I was Spectre Division. I was trained for scenarios like this, when the world burns, when command fails, when silence means death. They buried us. They erased us. But I survived. And I swore I would never wear that name again." The crew's faces shifted, shock, fear, awe. Some stepped back. Others leaned forward. She forced herself to keep going, though her chest burned. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. But if you follow me, I will not let you die. If you don't, then at least stop tearing each other apart before the enemy does it for you." Silence stretched long and heavy. Then a voice rose from the back, the young sailor, voice clear. "She saved us twice. I'll follow her." Murmurs rippled, some nodding, some shaking their heads. Division still lived. But something else had entered the steel, something sharper than fear. "Truth." Admiral Hale's gaze locked on hers, unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. The deck exhaled. Men shifted, glancing at one another. The fracture didn't vanish, but it no longer hid in shadows. It was open now, raw and real. Lyra stood tall, her chest heaving, her secret no longer secret. The ghost was gone. Only the woman remained. But in her heart, one question burned louder than the rest. Would truth bind them together, or break them for good? How do you measure a ship's strength? By its steel, or by the people inside it? The horizon groaned eastward, but afloat. Smoke still curled from patched steel. Men moved along the deck with bruises on their faces and questions in their eyes. They had heard the truth now. They could no longer pretend she was just another name on the roster. Lyra walked the passageways like a ghost stripped bare, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking. The whispers still followed her, but different now. Not just fear, not just suspicion. A strange, raw mixture: doubt, respect, unease, loyalty. She was Spectre anymore. She wasn't supply tech either. She was something in between, something they hadn't decided if they could accept. Admiral Hale gave no speech. He offered no verdict. He watched, waited, measured the crew like a man weighing the last thread that might hold a ship together. And then the storm came. The radar lit up near midnight. Dozens of blips moving fast, not probing, not testing. A final strike. The alarm wailed, red light flooding steel. Boots thundered across decks. Guns roared awake. Multiple missiles inbound. Surface craft closing, dozens. The sea outside was alive with fire again. Missiles streaked like meteors. Boats cut the waves in jagged wakes, their guns spitting sparks in the dark. Lyra was already on deck, salt spray stinging her face. The crew looked at her, waiting. Not all of them, not most, but enough. Her throat burned. Fear twisted in her chest. She had told them the truth. Now came the test. Her voice cut through the chaos. "Port intercepts, stagger your fire. Don't waste volleys, make them count. Machine guns, split fire, keep the boats from closing in." Men obeyed, not all, but enough. Guns thundered, tracers stitching fire across the Black Sea. The first missile shattered midair, the blast lighting their faces like a cruel dawn. Cheers rose, brief, then drowned by the next incoming scream. Another missile struck too close. The shockwave slammed the deck, men thrown to steel. Fire erupted along the rail. Medics rushed forward, dragging the wounded back. She staggered, ears ringing, chest aching, but her voice didn't falter. Battery 2, higher angle now. Forward deck, 3-second intervals. And again the missiles fell short. But the boats were closing, fast. Gunfire ripped across the deck, sparks leaping from steel. A sailor screamed, blood slick on his arm. Another fell, medics diving to drag him clear. Lyra ducked low, her heart pounding. She wanted to freeze, to curl back into silence, into shadow. But silence was gone now. Silence had already killed too much. She stood, shouted over the roar. Cut them before they close. Aim for the engines, stop their advance. The guns adjusted, tracers tearing across the waves. One boat erupted in flame. Another spun out, smoke trailing as it sank. But still they came, dozens, then scores. The crew faltered. She saw it in their eyes, the weight of impossible odds. And then Admiral Hale's voice thundered beside hers. You heard her. Follow her lead or die where you stand. His voice struck like lightning. The fracture split wide open, and then, impossibly, began to fuse. Men surged, no longer hesitating. Orders carried. Guns roared in rhythm. Missiles shattered midair. Boats exploded in waves of fire. The horizon fought like a beast cornered, claws bared, teeth sunk deep. Hours blurred into fire and smoke. The deck burned, steel screamed. The sea shook with the weight of battle. Men bled, men fell, but the ship still stood. And at the center, Lyra's voice never broke. Her throat raw, her chest burning, but her voice steady, calculating, commanding, leading. Not specter, not shadow. Leader. When the last missile burned out in the night sky, when the final boat sank in flames, silence fell. Not peaceful, not soft, but heavy, stunned, unreal. The horizon still floated, bleeding but alive. Men dropped to steel, gasping, coughing, some laughing through tears. Medics rushed. Fires hissed under hoses. Lyra leaned against the rail, her body trembling, lungs burning with smoke. Her eyes blurred, not just from salt but from something deeper. They had survived again. She turned and found the crew staring at her. Dozens of faces, smoke-streaked, bloodied, hollow with exhaustion, but looking at her not with fear, not with suspicion. With something else. Respect. The young sailor stepped forward, his face streaked with soot. He raised his fist to his chest, a gesture of salute not in the manual but born in the moment. Others followed, one by one, then in waves. The deck filled with men, battered but alive, saluting not the patch, not the program, but her. Her chest broke open with something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not triumph. Belonging. Admiral Hale stepped beside her, his face lined but his eyes steady. For the first time his voice softened. You are not Spectre anymore. You are Horizon. The words hit harder than the battle. She closed her eyes, the weight of years lifting, the ghost dissolving. The patch in her locker still waited, the skull still grinned, but it no longer owned her. She had been built to be a weapon, a shadow, a secret. But tonight she had been something more. Morning broke slow and gray, the sea calm again. The horizon limped eastward but unbroken. Men moved with exhaustion but also with unity. Lyra stood at the bow, the wind cold against her face, the horizon stretching endless ahead. For the first time she felt no need to shrink, no need to hide. She was Spectre, she wasn't Ghost. She was a sailor among sailors, a leader among men. And though silence had once defined her, she had learned something deeper. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.